the intention of this time together is to think about the ways that we might be able to exercise a historian's habits of mind. And zooming in on the American West, we have a show coming up at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in the fall that will explore many different facets of the American West. And so I wanted to start teasing in the marketing term that show, but then also practice some of the thinking that we'll need to be doing together in galleries. So that's where I got started with this approach. So let's move ahead. Just preview if you would like to put on the subtitles, because that serves you. I've moved most of the text up on the screen so that there should be space below to accommodate the subtitles if that helps you. We have just done the warm-up and we'll come back to that. We're going to unpack an artwork that's probably like terribly familiar to a lot of you. And what I hope is that if it is familiar to you, you really endeavor to look at it with a new eye so that we can see how much we can unpack from an artwork. Then we'll start defining those historians' habits of mind. And then we'll start to expand the story. It'll be at that time that I will put you in breakout rooms and give you a learning lab collection. And that learning lab collection has a whole bunch of resources that I've gathered from across the Smithsonian that connect to a set of different perspectives. And the intention is to see what can happen when you have a little bit of time to dig around and do research. We'll have a time to bring back that information and share it with the larger group, and then we'll pose questions, not necessarily to each other, but just practicing asking questions that are those generative questions that maybe set us on a research path. So one of the things that I think is interesting to emphasize is that Fritz Scholder isn't the artist whose work we see here. And he had what he considered to be a pretty complex identity. So his background was French, German, English, and American Indian. His grandmother was a member of the Luiseno tribe of Mission Indians, and Scholder spent his childhood traveling with his father, who was assigned to different posts as a school administrator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He said, "We lived on the Indian school campus because my father worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but we went to public schools. There were no Indian objects in the house. We never thought of ourselves as Indians. My father was a product of the old Indian schools. He was ashamed of being Indian." Scholder was not drawn to the subject matter that we see here when he entered Sacramento State University to earn his art degree. By the time he entered the world of Native American art in 1961, his style and love of color had been heavily influenced by abstract expressionists like Willem de Kooning, and Francis Bacon. So I grabbed this image because I thought it was a really interesting way to consider complexity. I think Scholder himself as an artist is a complex artist, and then the way that he blends influences across time, across culture, across place, really worked well with the ideas that I think we're going to be exploring today. Gloria, I noticed that in the chat box you put students generally understand the American West as cowboys and Indians. For college students, a number of your population are Yakima, and the college is on reservation land. So there's a mixture of pride and colonialism. Thank you for sharing that. That must make your conversations really both rich and complex and challenging. So that, yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so what we're going to do is move forward with that close looking, this unpacking of the artwork. And just as Gloria has done in the chat box, my first invitation is for you to share in the chat 5 things that you see in this segment of a larger work. And again, if it's familiar to you, that's totally okay. Fair to bring your previous experience with this work, but right now we're just looking and identifying things we could point to. So what are 5 things you see? Ooh, Shannon starting us out. Thank you. We've got mountains, big skies, people summiting something, and muted colors. Love. Okay, Mary, you know what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to ask you, what do you see that makes you say victory?
Yeah. I just think the way that they're rising up and he has his arm raised, to me, is like he's dominated, like he's summited, but he's also achieved victory. Like he's achieved his goal. And I assume it's a he from, and the other person is like, he's first there, like, in a way it's a little bit of, and I think, again, putting my own, sensibilities into it, that he's claimed this space. So, it feels like he's dominant over it.
Yeah, thank you. So part of asking that question, right, when we, especially if we're exercising our historian's habits of mind, so easy to start telling a story, right? So slowing down and saying, what do I say that makes me think that, say that, whatever. So climbing up with a stalk. Can you tell me more, Kathleen? I don't know what a stalk is. I need help.
Like a climbing stick.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Beautiful.
A lot of people use them when they go on long hikes.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. A few clouds. Folks are noticing the colors. They're golden or violet. We've got yellow. So there are a good number of colors coming through. Emily's noticing that it's a mountain top. Perhaps we see on the right side. I love it. Beautiful. Okay, so let me add a little smidge of more of the painting here. Same thing. We're going to practice just looking. We're taking an inventory of stuff that you could point to. So for example, some people have said, oh, that lady in the middle, she looks just like the Virgin Mary or a Madonna figure. And then I would have to say, well, what do you see that makes you say that? And then they might fill in with, oh, well, she's wearing blue and white, and then she's clasping her hands and she's got this baby in her arms, and that's what makes me think of this Madonna figure. So again, we're going to exercise the 5 things that you see that you could point to. If you hear rumbling in the background over here, my sweet husband is doing all kinds of yard work outside. It is his love language coming through to all of us. For 5 things you see in this part of the artwork. Ooh, Shannon. She has brought a word, a phrase. Okay, so you're following it up with a man pointing to the frontier. We have vast land. We have yellow skies, taking a moment to breathe and take it in. I love it. So Kathleen is noticing a beaver-skinned hat and felt, wide-brimmed hats, a lookout point, guns, a man pointing to the distance, and that word manifest destiny. Again, love. Okay, look at this. Pointing is coming up so much. So this seems to be a very important gesture. Let's see, we've got men surrounding a group of women. There's a horse in the foreground. I love it. And then Emily, you say group, gaze, openness, land, and top. Emily, either in the chat or out loud, would you be willing to share more about what you mean by gaze? While you type, Gloria is noticing men on horses, figures looking and pointing toward the left, and different headgear. Beautiful. So it's not just like they're pointing with their bodies, but it's like they're pointing with their eyes. Their attention is going right that way. Okay, beautiful. So I'm taking notes as we go. I appreciate this. Okay, so here's the rest of this part of the painting. You know the drill. Now, what are our 5 things in this part of the painting? Five things. And it's okay. It's fair play. Like if now all of a sudden you see something you didn't see before in another part of the artwork, that's totally fine. Feel free to add that in. Crowded, turbulent, anxious. Oh, Mary. So Mary is calling attention to the right side, it's crowded, it's congested, there's lots of stuff going on. And then on the left side, we used the word openness on the other side, that's interesting. So there's a contrast. So we're noticing a contrast. Emily is cataloging the mix and mingle on the right side. We've got wagons, horses, protection, women, and lines. Beautiful. Okay. Shannon, talk to me either in the chat or out loud about your assertion of oneness. I'm curious about that. Can you tell me more, please?
So looking at it, you see some people, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, looking at it, you see some people are looking out, but you see most people are kind of looking at each other. They seem to be moving as one group. They seem to be having a common purpose.
Okay, beautiful. So they're looking at each other, their proximity. So these clues are ones that the artist put in here so that we would think of them as a togetherness. Okay, beautiful. Gloria is mentioning movement and more varied hats indicating different roles. That's so interesting. So thinking about like the hat telling you a story about the people. Kathleen is noting native people, pack horses, Conestoga wagons, men in charge are directing, and they seem happy about the possibilities. Would you be willing, Kathleen, to tell me what do you see that makes you say there are native people in the picture?
It seems like the woman where light is hitting her face in the lower right-hand side might be native.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm grateful you brought it up. Yeah. Emily's noticing there's a cross on the rock. And if you look really closely underneath that cross, we have people interring somebody. Somebody is shrouded or wrapped in a blanket, and there's a group around them, like lowering them into a grave. So there's a grave site there. Okay, so we have all these different roles. We have all these different people. We have this contrast right and left. So let's dig around in this painting a little bit more. This is the whole of the work, and this work is a draft or a sketch for a final mural in the U.S. Capitol building. And it is surrounded, so there's this main body, this main painting in the middle, and then it's surrounded by these tiny little vignettes, so little scenes from biblical and mythological literature or history. We see on the bottom left, it's hard to see this little dark figure. That is meant to be an American eagle that's kind of emerging from these vines. And then at the bottom left, we have, oh my gosh, Thomas Jefferson. No, not Thomas Jefferson. Let me look. I'm going to say the wrong thing. William Clark. There we go. Bottom right is Daniel Boone. So we have these two figures, and then somebody just mentioned San Francisco. This is the bay at the very bottom. So then those are things that we see on the outside all around. And then at the very top, you can see words that, sorry, I'm looking really closely at my reproduction so I don't say it wrong. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. Okay, so these are things that we see really quickly. Gut check. What are your thoughts? What is the message of the artwork at this point? With all of these little details, we have the three magi on the top left. We have the Argos, I guess, which was the Argonauts' ship in Search of the Golden Fleece. We have, whom else do we have in this scene? We have Hercules battling the Nemean lion in the top right. We have Columbus in the middle right. So we have all these different figures. We have Moses on the middle left. So what's the big message here for you?
I think it is that, just as everybody is kind of writing in the chat, this is America's destiny, and it's not just America's destiny, but this is going to become the mythology of America.
Become the mythology. So it's destiny becoming, this is this almost moment of like, this is what we see for ourselves, and we're going to turn it almost looking backward and say, this is becoming the thing that it's all rooted in. This is the story we tell ourselves. The promised land, like Moses in the Bible, part of a greater history, makes me think about the frontier thesis. It's the destiny to go west, or the right to expand. So certainly there's like a lot of heavy laden layers of meaning that Emanuel Leutze, who's the creator of this work, added in. So then let's practice a little bit about widening our scope. So the words that you see on the screen are from an article called Reading Like a Historian that you see cited on the bottom right. The steps include, before reading the document, so theoretically, even before we do all of that seeing, we could ask questions about its creation. Who made it? For whom? Where? When? And why? So that's part of what the label text next to an artwork offers. So we have Emanuel Gottlieb Leutze is our artist who made it. For whom, I told you, and it says here, it's a mural study for the US Capitol. Where did he make it? Well, he made it in the United States at the time. He was an emigre who was working in the US. When, so we can look at the label text again, he made it in 1861, and why? As practice for this mural. So we can answer all of those questions. I'm going to ask you to contextualize a little bit. So we're going to start to think about the historical context of 1861. So what do you know is happening in 1861, either here in the US or abroad? What's happening in 1861? Yep, we've got the Civil War. This is the beginning year of the Civil War. Anything more that's happening in 1861? Europe is experiencing revolutions. There's slavery happening in the US. There's an election. Okay. So there's a good amount of turmoil, change, enslavement. Fascinating. The Industrial Revolution. So we're at a technological changing point. We're at eventually, thank goodness, a humanitarian changing point, to some degree anyway. An influx of immigrants and movement within the US. So there's a changing point of demographics. Mary's adding, the Republicans were in control, westward expansion, the question of the future of the territories, which we've recently added land from the Mexican War. We've got railroads. I mean, there's a lot going on at this time. And so when we start to think of the historical context, that's the chronological, like what its situation chronologically. Let's think though about the situation of this artwork within the US Capitol. So what do you know about the US Capitol, whether the building or the city itself? I'm imagining that people are either writing life novellas Or it's like me, I don't actually know that much. Beautiful. Mary is entering the idea that it's in a federalist style, which honors Greece. Awesome, Emily. My husband and I are guessing out loud. Totally. So yeah, but what is it? Like, what's the point of this building? What is it for? It's a seat of power, right? It's a seat of power, particularly in this time of white men. Anything more that you know about the US Capitol? It's organized, it's got a grid style, a dome to allude to this ancient architecture, like interesting connection to our painting. And we're going to come to that in a minute. This idea of hearkening back seems to be really important. Anything more? My city is full of white marble. So I'm just going to add that in there, that this is a an ivory colored building on the hill. Okay. So interesting, right? Like if we were going to then identify a research question, maybe we need to know a little bit more about the building. Maybe we would want to know a little bit more about which wall would this mural go on, who commissioned it, et cetera, et cetera. We can unpack that line of thinking a little bit further. So I'm going to give you a bit more historical context just to seed our conversation. So westward expansion, which in and of itself as a term is a tricky one, began in earnest in 1803. Thomas Jefferson negotiated a treaty with France in which the U.S. paid France $15 million for the Louisiana Territory, which was 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River, effectively doubling the size of the United States. The lands acquired stretched from Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. Jefferson later owned that he had, quote, stretched the Constitution until it cracked to acquire Louisiana. As soon as the treaty was signed, he sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark with their Corps of Discovery to find a route to the Pacific Ocean. They returned with their mission completed in 1806. American artists explored the new territory and chronicled the settlement of the frontier. Landscapes extolling the nation's geographic wonders from Niagara Falls to the Grand Canyon drove and documented Western expansion. So then, really quickly in the chat box with that little bit of information with a little more about our sourcing and contextualization, would you please put a research question in the chat, something that you don't know yet or you're curious about that would help you better understand this particular document? And when I say this particular document, I mean the painting. Sorry, I realize that could be unclear.
Okay.
Ooh, Shannon, I love that. How does this one compare to other paintings done of other significant events in American history? Why was this painting commissioned at this point? Right? It's like the Civil War is happening and you want to paint a picture about people heading west? That's interesting. Why in the world would that happen? Kathleen is curious about whether it's commissioned specifically for the Capitol building, because of course Loitza could have made it for any number of different places and shopped it around and then was like, here, this works really well at your US Capitol. Was it a propaganda piece? Who commissioned it and how much did it cost? I love these questions. Anything more? Any other questions? What questions would your students ask? Here's the next layer. Like, oh, I love that. So now we're curious, is Loitza even like for real? Did he go west and do research, or is this just a picture of an idea? That's a really interesting question to me. Any other things that your students might wonder based on this little ping of information? Ooh, how does this compare? I love your corroboration questions. This is great. So like, how does this compare to other scenes of historically significant events, or alternatively of pioneer / Western paintings? Gorgeous. Anything more? Did Leutze have a specific wagon train in mind? I love this. So these are interesting questions. Okay. Here is the challenge. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to invite you to go, like, don't leave this meeting, please, but just go to the internet and take one of these questions and try to answer it. I'm going to put Emmanuel Leutz's name in the chat box again so that you can figure out how to spell it, because it's a bit tricky. And just follow one of those questions. It doesn't have to be your own, for 5 minutes, and see what you can come up with. Ready, set, go. One minute left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if we'll come back together, my invitation to you is to look at this artwork again with me with your new information. So first of all, did you find something interesting that you're willing to share with your classmates right now? Either in the chat box or out loud.
I did.
Yeah, jump in. What'd you find?
This is Mary. And so a couple of things I thought were really interesting that had, I mean, beyond like the details about how you did the painting, that he did travel out west, like, oh, that was interesting. But I thought, like, and I hadn't picked it out, that he added an African-American boy and that he probably painted him in later. I mean, again, I don't know if you can see him in this or if it's on the Capitol, which is in the House of Representatives. I thought that was really interesting because, again, historical context was potentially after the Emancipation Proclamation. He was painting during that time that he added that. So I thought that was super interesting. But also one of the other things is that they're pointing to a barren landscape. And with that in mind, why was it barren? Because there were folks who certainly were, indigenous folks who had lived there, and now it's barren. So what does that tell us about American policies with Native Americans? So I thought, like, digging into that, because again, it's like, this is a very like patriotic for a very certain subset of, Americans. But, I think the question has to be, is it representative and appropriate for today, considering what we know and how those, people were forced to leave that area. So again, I thought there were a lot of those like questions and thoughts that I wasn't aware of looking at the original, or it didn't occur to me looking at the original piece.
Beautiful. Okay, so lots of ideas in there. And Gloria is noting that Smart History noted, quote, erasing its recent history as part of Mexico and the Native Americans who were displaced by American settlers. So Gloria's question was, is this a propaganda piece? And Gloria has found affirmation of that. Anything more that you've discovered in your 5-minute research? Anything that's pinging for you? If something comes up, I'd love to see it in the chat box. So the word or the phrase manifest destiny has already come up. We've used it twice in the chat box, which I think is super interesting because we're very familiar with that term. And I did a little research into the term itself. The phrase manifest destiny originated in the 19th century, yet the concept behind the phrase originated in the 17th century, so 200 years earlier, with the first European immigrants in America. English Protestants or Puritans. Manifest destiny is defined as, quote, the concept of American exceptionalism. That is the belief that America occupies a special place among the countries of the world. The use of the term manifest destiny did not enter conventional conversation until 1845, when journalist John Lewis O'Sullivan wrote that it was, quote, our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us. 19th century expansionism went hand in hand with the concept of manifest destiny, each signaling that there was a God-given sanctioned right to conquer the land and displace the, quote, uncivilized or non-Christian people who it was believed did not take full advantage of the land that had been given to them. This ideology served as justification for violent displacement of Native peoples and the forceful takeover of land by military means. So then my question is, if we know that this is the background of the term manifest destiny, if we know that the artist chose to title this artwork, Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way, what new ideas do you have about the artwork now? What new ideas do you have? Or maybe an old one that's been affirmed. reinforces the idea and justifies the expansion. Definitely a propaganda piece, no longer appropriate for the US Capitol. Takes on a more negative connotation. Interesting. So we are in 2023. We are recognizing what violence occurred as part of this, or undergirded this expansion. We recognize the violence against Black people, against Native people, against Latinx people that came as part and parcel of territorial conflict. And we are thinking about, what does that mean for us today, that this is an image that was in the building that is our seat of power here in DC. So this is interesting, right? When we are historians reading like historians, we do this sourcing. We ask who made it, for whom, where, when, and why. We look for the historical context. We talked about the Civil Wars going on. We've got this Industrial Revolution going on. What else was happening in that particular time in place in 1861 in the United States? We did some really close reading, right? We looked at that artwork very carefully. We identified some subtleties in his message. We thought a little bit about the artist's motive and his tone. You've already started to think about these corroboration and multiple perspective questions. Corroboration, of course, is comparing documents on the same topic to one another. How do they connect and how do they challenge one another? And then multiple perspectives, of course, is a thinking about whose voices are present and whose voices are absent in a document. And then think about, how do people with different perspectives think about that same topic? So I wanted to highlight that, and I really like the way this is described by the National Council on Public History. Historians are trying to understand how and why things change over time. It's not a matter of simply pinpointing causes and outcomes, but also considering different contexts and timescales for interpreting available facts. So let's look back again, reading like a historian, whose voices are present in this particular text, who is represented or who is spoken for in Leutze's Westward, the course of empire takes its way. Okay, wait a minute. Anybody else? This is a monocular vision. Okay. Let's flesh it out a little bit. White men, all white men? Ooh, absent. Ooh, we've got Mary's thinking ahead. Oh, cool. So we've got immigrants to some degree represented here. Thank you, Kathleen. Absent would be Indigenous people, women. Okay, beautiful. Any other present or absent voices? Jump in. Who's present, who's absent? Ooh, okay. Thank you, Shannon. I like how you capitalized American spirit. So that's almost like an embodiment. I'm thinking about the painting. This is like me being a terrible art history person, but this woman in white, and she's trailing the telegraph wire across the Western landscape. That's who comes into mind immediately. It's almost like an embodiment of an idea. Okay. So Gloria is adding that whose voice is really represented here is a German immigrant artist. That's really interesting. We've got people who intermarried with Native Americans, perhaps. Sorry, I'm taking notes and trying to talk at the same time. It never works. So Mary is noting that in this image, we cannot see the freed slave. So he's not represented here. So, but he was represented, or that idea was represented in the later version. And Mary's noting that a lot of these people seem very similar without clear distinctions of class. That's an interesting point. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so then we've got present and absent voices, right? And what I'm going to invite you to do is to expand the scope even further with me. So I am offering us a challenge. Oftentimes when we look at works, we're looking at works from exactly the same time period or within like a decade of each other. And we're saying these two works are on the same topic and they're in the same time period. And when I look at them, I see that's how I corroborate, or that's how I gauge the perspective. This time, and this is following the thread of the upcoming exhibition, which actually is in Utah right now, called Many Wests. The idea of that exhibition is that artists explore the idea of the West that really never was. And the artists that are represented on the screen are ones that are exploring and represented in the show this idea of what is the West. So what you see here are one, two, three, four works. So the series on the bottom is one work that represent different perspectives that were not in our present list when we were looking for present and absent voices. To contextualize this a little bit further, the completion of the railroads to the West following the Civil War opened up a vast area of the region to settlement and economic development. This is quoting the Library of Congress. White settlers from the East poured across the Mississippi to mine, farm, and ranch. African-American settlers also came west from the deep South, convinced by promoters of all Black Western towns that prosperity could be found there. Chinese railroad workers further added to the diversity of the region's population. By the 1880s, most American Indians had been confined to reservations, often in areas of the West that appeared least desirable to white settlers. The cowboy became the symbol of the West in the late 19th century, often depicted in popular culture as a glamorous or heroic figure. The stereotype of the heroic white cowboy is far from true, however. The first cowboys were Spanish vaqueros who had introduced cattle to Mexico centuries earlier. Black cowboys also rode the range. So when we think about the voices absent in the Loitza work, a number of historically accurate voices are also missing, right? So we want to just like tug on those threads a little bit with an activity that I'm about to turn over to you. So we've got 6 folks in the room. I am going to make you into 2 groups, and I'm going to send you into breakout rooms in a heartbeat. What you're going to do is spend 10 minutes, sorry, my pen just dropped on the carpet, 10 minutes working with your group. You're going to look at the Learning Lab collection that I have created for you and choose just one of those perspectives that is absent from Loitza's painting. Let's do this together so it's really clear. We're going to look at the Learning Lab collection. You'll see Loitza's painting appears leftmost, and then they're by groups, artworks that are more contemporary or modern works and some historical background on them. So what I'm inviting you to do is to make sense of this new work. So for instance, I might choose Diary, December 12th, 1941, with the understanding that 1941 is not the same thing as 1861. But what could I learn by putting this artwork in conversation with Loitza? What would I better understand about the American West, whatever that is, by putting these 2 artworks in connection with one another? In order to do that, I need to do the historical reading. So I'm going to be doing my sourcing, asking who made it, for whom, where, when, why. We're going to do some contextualization, what's going on in the time of the scene itself or the time that it was made. corroboration, comparing points of view, taking multiple perspectives by putting this image against that of Emanuel Leutze's, and doing some close reading of the work itself. So that's what we're about to do. In the other link that you'll see in the chat box is this document here. So when your group has chosen your perspective, you'll notice that I did the sourcing for you because I'm not giving you enough time to really do all the stuff that I'm asking of you. So for instance, you'll see that this artwork here was made by a woman named Kay Walking Stick. She made it in Jackson Heights, New York in the year 2012. And her purpose is to focus on the American landscape and its metaphorical significance to Native Americans and to all of our citizenry. So then your opportunity is to fill in this document with your classmates, quote unquote. You may think, for instance, that you will divvy up or delegate some of those roles to make it fit into the time allotted. I leave it to you. You're going to make up the decisions, but you're going to fill this in and then we're going to bring it back into conversation with the Leutze painting. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. Let me then... So here are the notes again. So in case it's useful to you, as a group, you're going to choose one perspective. You're going to find that perspective represented in the Learning Lab collection, which is the tiny URL Many West LL, standing for Learning Lab. You're going to dig through the content there and summarize your findings in the Histories, Habits of Mind, HHM West document. And then when we come back together, you're going to give us your pitch. You're going to tell us a little bit about your artwork and artist and discuss ways that it connects to and challenges Leutze's work. So I'm about to send you into breakout rooms. There are going to be 2 of them, and we're going to come back together in 10 minutes. Ready, set, go. Welcome, welcome back. Hello. Okay, my friends, this is where I needed to hear from you all. What artwork did you select? What did you learn about it? Can I hear one person from each group?
I don't know if Gloria would like to, delve. And I will say and she has a little bit, certainly more depth and knowledge of the artist of Jacob Lawrence. But we looked at his painting, which is, right here, Firewood 55, which is, for those of you who are, again, because I don't think it's listed on screen, but it's the one with the very, like, the woman who's looks very hunched over with a red, has like a Matisse type quality to it, and has like the blue behind and the clouds and everything else. It looks kind of broken down. I tried to do a quick search to see if I could find some of the background knowledge about the painting. I think Gloria is very, adept to say, this is certainly slavery or sharecropping. It did seem like it was a picture of slavery. That was, again, just as I tried to do a little bit of a search, but certainly has it's a dismal, picture. It's, everything's broken, including this, this woman that is, and our eyes are drawn to her. One of the sources mentioned that, the wood looks like the shape of a cross. I couldn't find more about that, but I thought that was really interesting. It's very stark, and I would, we don't have any lushness or any, there's no vegetation around. It's, so it's completely the antithesis, I would say, like, again, if I contrasted this with the other, piece that we were looking at as a group, that seemed to say like, okay, we had all, some tough moments, but now we have this open possibility, like, and this amazing like horizon that we're looking towards. And this belies what that reality might look like. And I thought, this might be on the, again, just, it looks like it could be on what we would say like as the American prairie, because it doesn't have, again, the lack of vegetation. And Gloria thought maybe Chicago area, kind of outside, but again, there's a brokenness. So it stands in pretty stark contrast, and it's, represents again that voice, the that Black voice, the African American voice that we don't see in that other painting. So
Yeah.
but again, like I think Gloria had a much deeper knowledge of Jacob Lawrence. I guess he's from Washington, and he created this in 1942. And it sounds like Gloria was saying that he had served as a military officer as well. So
yeah, so interesting that like one of the connections between this painting and the one that we just looked at is that both are on the cusp of major wars, right? Like both of these are images. Lawrence painted this, perhaps while he was enlisted, but it's an interesting thought. The other thing that I got to learn about when I was researching this painting as part of the exhibition is the number of all Black towns that were in the American territories. And so included in the Learning Lab collection that is linked in the chat previously is a bit, and why don't I just show you, because we're all here together. Awesome. If you go to the Learning Lab collection, there is this segment, there's this great interview with Brian Stevenson. But there is first the map of the migration routes out of the South. I had really understood them to be primarily north, but it's really fascinating to see in this map, for instance, how many folks headed into the Midwest and then far west. And then also going back to what I promised is a link to, let me find it here, the Encyclopedia of Oklahoma History and Culture, including information about the all Black towns, which I was like, oh my gosh, I am learning something so important. So that's painting itself started a line of inquiry for me about why in the world would curators include a work by an artist who I know to have been exploring the Great Migration, but in a exhibition about the American West. So that point of curiosity got me there. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
That's awesome.
But something that I noticed, and you're such an adept explainer of artworks, is that you're juxtaposing kind of the lushness, especially on the westernmost side of the Loitza painting, the left side of the painting, if we thought of the painting as a map. You're contrasting and juxtaposing that to the barrenness of the Lawrence painting, but then your mention of the cross shape of the firewood in firewood number 55 is a really interesting connection to the cross that we also saw in the Loitza painting. So interesting. And then I love that the hand plow that's included, because of course, when I think of like prairie life, breaking the soil and creating like farming spaces is a really important component. But in this Lawrence painting, it doesn't seem like there's much arable soil. There's just this plow. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. Gloria, is there anything that you wanted to add to what Mary shared?
No, she covered it really well.
Beautiful. Go team. That's awesome. All right. So for our second group, was there somebody who's willing to share what you researched and what you learned?
Yeah, so we did the picture on the far right over here. December 12th, 1941. It's by Roger Shomomura. And a couple of things that Cecilia noticed is that it's all colorful and vibrant inside. And yes, you have the ominous soldier next to her, but you also have the shadow on the lattice that's going to close, and it's going to basically make her invisible. This was done as a response to his grandmother. His grandmother is the woman inside her name is Toku Shimamura. She came to the US in 1912, and she was a midwife who wrote 56 diaries, but not all of them survived. And this was what kind of inspired him to write it, was this very short entry from December 12th, 1941, hence why it's called that.
Yeah.
I spent all day at home. Starting from today, we were permitted to withdraw $100 from the bank. This was for our sustenance of life, who we are an enemy to them. I deeply felt America's large-heartedness in dealing with us. So this is in response to everything that's happening with Pearl Harbor and then with the internment camps, and she and her family will actually be moved. One thing Cecilia mentioned that was awesome was they're actually moved eastward.
Mm-hmm.
They have to leave Seattle and they have to move to the east. They end up moving to Idaho. And it just made this huge thing of, can you imagine us reading something that our grandparents or great grandparents wrote and then sketching it and painting it as this. So it was just a very kind of moving thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So interesting to consider that, like, especially for Japanese Americans living, so, of course they were American citizens living on the West Coast. They were moved away from California, away from Washington, away from Oregon, into camps in the innermost portions of the West, with the intention of securing the United States against potential further attack after Pearl Harbor, which is, just like that's interesting, because of course in the Loitza painting they're moving west. So were you able to find any connections or thematic links between those two paintings?
So looking at it, a couple of things we noticed is, whereas the first painting, it's very open, you see a very, very open space, and you kind of get this feeling of hope. With the December picture, it's the exact opposite. It's them being shut. One of the few things you might be able to make a commentary on, but would be a little bit more worrisome, is in both paintings, it's women who are being looked over by men. So having a commentary about how, we're doing this for protection, whereas in reality, we know that it was purely racism that led the Japanese to being put into camps. And so they're very good for comparing differences, but we didn't see as many things together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So thank you. I appreciate that. So if this is a useful resource to you in the future, please do use the Learning Lab collection. K Walking Stick I have in as an artwork to explore a Native American connection or juxtaposition with the Loitza picture. And then the Cristina Fernandez work that is at the bottom. This is a work where she is replaying or reenacting, I guess, her grandmother's migration upward out of Mexico to California, and like marking her along her path, essentially. So thinking about the people for whom they did not come to the United States came to them, as Gloria mentioned earlier. So there are like lots of different perspectives. And thinking about the perspective that we noticed in the Loitza work, very, very patriotic, very much like the shining, golden West that's ready for us and that sort of thing. And then to be able to juxtapose it with these more modern works that are exploring people's experiences moving maybe throughout the West in the way that they understand that space, perhaps differently than Loitza did. So then my inquiry for you is, if you were going to title an exhibition with these 5 artworks in it, what would you call it and why? I'm going to put that in the chat box because that was a big thing. If you were to title an exhibition with these 5 artworks in it, what would you call it and why? Ooh. The westward experience. Ooh. Thank you, Mary. Why that? I'm curious. Women and the West, choices and consequences. Ooh, Shannon. Oops, sorry. Any other exhibition title? Lens. Ooh, Gloria. Simple one. You even avoided the colon. There's always, I feel like there's always a colon in an exhibition title. That's awesome. All right, so we've got 3 alternative titles. Mary's saying because each group and person saw this movement and experienced it differently, and the general title allows people to interpret this. Beautiful. I love that. So the Lloyd's work will not be in the show that is coming to Sam in July, but the title that was chosen for that show is Many Wests, Artist, Shape, and American Idea. And I think that's really interesting to think of an American idea as a core component. So then let's go back to where we started, back to that idea of the American West. What new ideas do you have about it? And what are you still wondering? So at the beginning, we said that the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the American West was very much informed by like cowboys and Indians a little bit. And then there's some manifest destiny in there. There were some other ideas about land use and who gets to be there. Do you have new ideas about the American West now that we've gone through this experience together? Or alternatively, what are you still wondering? Do you have a new research question that you'd like to follow? And while you think out loud, I will, or in the chat box rather, I'll let you know that I was just in Denver for an art, I'm sorry, just a museum conference. And it was really intriguing and interesting to see how Denver is in their museum spaces exploring some of the history that we've been talking about very frankly. And it's interesting to experience that exploration in the places where it happened. It just helped me think about how the context of the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. is really different from, for instance, Salt Lake City, where the show is now. So I'm really curious to see how it's received differently in different places. So that's just my new wonder. Mary is struck by the all-Black Western towns in Oklahoma, wants to know more about self-governance and that sort of thing. Shannon, you're going on the 7th. That's so great. If you have any thoughts and think to share them, I'd really love to know just like what your experience is. That's great. Thank you. I'd really appreciate that. Anything more?
Oh, I guess I had an interesting, we were looking at some of the writings of Narcissa Whitman, who was one of the missionaries who came to Washington. And in her writing, she was talking about leaving America when she was coming to the West. You know, this wasn't America, and to them, they were actually leaving. So yeah. When you were talking about the movement the last set of painting, or no, sorry, photographs, where they were like America was coming to them,
Yeah.
and then also kind of moving back and forth
Yeah.
across what we would think of as the U.S. American border. I would just be interested in exploring that idea of, you know, I guess, yeah, leaving and coming, and whether or not it's America, you know.
Yeah.
those things.
Thank you, Cecilia. That's a really interesting idea, because the boundaries to me feel so fixed. I haven't had experience moving across country borders. And there's an artist whose name is Tanya Aganiga, who's in our collection at the Renwick, who grew up in Tijuana and went to school in the United States, and she would ride in her dad's truck at like 4 o'clock in the morning every morning, get dropped off at her grandmother's house, wait until her grandmother's house woke up, and then eat breakfast there and go to school, and then go back each day. So she's crossing the border every day, as so many people do. And it's just a wild thing to realize that is a completely different lived experience than the one that I have, and recognizing that, you know, how mind-blowing it must have been to be in a place where somebody comes in and all of a sudden says like, oh, now you're a different country, or now I'm leaving the country when I cross this line. It's a very different thing. And so thank you for bringing that up in my mind. Gloria's noticing there's a comfort in thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion in the art museum space. And thank you, I appreciate that.